Indeed, the whole novel can be interpreted not so much as Gothic or Victorian, but as distinctly Arthurian and medieval. In Dracula, Arthurian chivalry is displayed through the antiquated notion of comitatus, whereby the retinue of a chieftain or prince would band together for a common purpose and set forth his warriors to fulfill their master's Van Helsing's quest. The professor provides a Merlin-like presence. He is alone, without the love and comfort of a family, and has absorbed himself in his world of magic and medicine to offset a life barren of human warmth. King Arthur surfaces as Arthur Holmwood, lending the young aristocrat not only his Christian name, but also his wife. Both Guinevere and Lucia are expropriated by rivals. The functions of the two Arthurs are also comparable. In earlier days they enjoyed adventures aplenty, but now the centre of attention has switched to others of lower social standing, respectively King Arthur's knights and Holmwood's commoner acquaintances. Turning to the simple, good-natured Jonathan Harker, he is almost reincarnation of Sir Galahad, the purest of the knights who discovered the Grail. As for Count Dracula, he is both the corn god and the fisher king. Stoker refers to the Count, who can direct the elements just as the ancients supposed their gods able to do, as forsaking his own barren land to walk among the teeming millions of London, who are like the multitude of standing corn. Dracula is, moreover, a manifestation of the fisher king, a being who has anachronistically outlived himself. Yet he still exudes a primitive life force, something of which decadent contemporary England, hidebound by its scientific rationalism, is bereft. He must therefore be slain in his energies and vitality reabsorbed if the London wasteland, with its swarming population, is to be rejuvenated. There is nothing novel in this concept. Since time immemorial, man has slain his gods in order to absorb their powers. And how does Stoker describe the Count's native land after his spectacular downfall? The castle stood as before, reared high above the waste of desolation. With the withering of Dracula comes the withering of his domain. Van Helsing fully appreciates that Dracula's energies are in themselves neutral. They can be used for good or ill, for it is not the least of Dracula's terrors that this evil thing is rooted deep in all good. It is hoped that the Count's powers can be absorbed and utilized to assist in the creation of a fresh new 20th century totem. And one is reminded again that there have been from the loins of this very Dracula great men. Once more, this focuses attention on Jonathan and Mina's son. Symbolically, the infant will grow to represent 20th century manhood, eventually inheriting the renewed wasteland. In Arthurian language, he will inherit the mantle of a modern fisher king. What should be elaborated is the extent of this child's relationship to Dracula. Out of the ashes of one totemic being emerges the conception of another. Young Quincy Harker will certainly be unique, but not solely by virtue of his parents' extraordinary psychological experiences. Genetically, he is an alarmingly complex being. He is linked to the band of Dracula's adversaries in more than just their names. He also has their blood. Worse, he has that of Dracula flowing through his veins. His mother has sucked the blood of Dracula, who had previously sucked that of Lucy, who had already received transfusions from Seward, Van Helsing, and Holmwood. The only blood not in the boy is that of Quincy, his nominal father, for Lucy died before she could transmit his blood to Dracula. Nevertheless, in his matrix of blood ties, this is no ordinary child, and he will grow into no ordinary man, for far more profound reasons than Van Helsing can suspect. This child of the future offers the hint of parousia. It would appear then that the diabolical reversal of myth in Dracula suggested by the tarot is reinforced through consideration of the Grail. Fundamental to the Grail myth is the interrelationship between the vitality of the ailing king and that of his kingdom. The purpose of the hero is to restore the former, and with it the latter. The point of Harker's journey to Transylvania, however, is not to heal the Fisher King, Dracula, with the aid of the Grail. It is to release the vampire for the purpose of regaining his youth by draining the living of their blood. Throughout the rest of the novel, Harker's fate hinges on that of Dracula. The destruction and dissolution of the one is the ecstasy and salvation of the other. In the postscript, the reader is introduced to a child, not the heir of Jonathan Harker, but a representative of all the dark powers at Dracula's command. Here, as elsewhere, Stoker either reverses the classical myth or manipulates it to his own purpose. Either way, he acknowledges his debt to the profound mysteries of the Tarot and the Grail. Chapter 1. The Vampire. In all the darkest pages of the malign supernatural, there is no more horrible tradition than that of the vampire. A pariah even among demons. Foul are his ravages. Gruesome and seemingly barbaric are the ancient and approved methods by which folk must rid themselves of this hideous pest. Montague Summers, The Vampire. The modern imagination does not afford excessive respect to the notion of the vampire. Overexposure to the cult of the horror cinema and the resultant commercial exploitation of a tried and tested money spinner has filled our collective consciousness with a sensationalist pastiche of blood, fangs, black coats, and sharpened stakes. The word vampire may invite a laugh or a smirk, where in previous centuries it instilled terror. Few societies in the past did not have their own version of the vampire. Its gradual disappearance from the active superstitions around the world is attributable to many factors. Science has much to answer for, not least for the invention of electric light, which pierces the shadows of the deepest recesses and denies the shapes of our imaginings as their hiding places. For many people, night has lost its mysteries, its secrets, its fears. Were science to have lagged in its headlong rush to annihilate our fantasies, no doubt we should still acknowledge the realm of the vampire, for its intellectual foundations are by no means completely illogical or incoherent. The concept of the vampire is founded upon two precepts: the belief in life after death and the magical power of blood. The biological and mystical significance of blood was recognized by the earliest human communities. They knew nothing of the viruses or bacteria or other organisms which can debilitate or kill. But one cause of death was easily ascertained, for it depended on no more than basic observation and could never be refuted. From injuries sustained either by accident or in battle, through the torn flesh seeped a strange, mysterious, bright red fluid. Lose enough of it, and you died. No other bodily fluid was endowed with such power. The sight of blood was the sight of death, and therein lies the basic emotion it evokes: fear. Human strength and health reside within blood. It is the elixir of life, the child's first nourishment in the mother's womb. From awareness that blood was essential to life, it was but a short step to the belief that it was, in fact, synonymous with life. The soul of a living creature lay within its veins. Blood was not only life, it was soul, and therefore an object of magic and taboo. Ingeniously, a perverse logic then intervened. If emission of blood weakens and destroys, it surely followed that consumption of that magic ichor could restore, rejuvenate, bring back life. If blood was life, then absorbing blood was absorbing life and soul. This logical deduction resulted in widely comparable patterns of human behavior. Blood came to form the basis of medical care, as other scientific nature was unknown. Diseases were presumed to be the consequence of a sinful life and the displeasure of the gods, necessitating the spilling of the sufferer's bad blood, both as cure and repentance. The curative bleeding of patients survives to the 20th century in societies that would resent the label primitive. Since antiquity, crude blood transfusions from the healthy to the sick have been performed, and an ancient prescribed remedy for leprosy was to bathe in blood. Warriors in battle would drink the warm blood of the slain, not only as a gesture of total domination and possession, but in the belief that the victim's strength and courage would pass into the victor. Blood could also act as a fertilizer and be sprinkled over crops. It was endowed with the cosmetic properties and would be generously smeared over the skin. It would be ceremonially mingled between comrades even today in the practice of blood brothers. Man's preoccupation with this magic substance provides the first prerequisite for belief in vampirism. The second is death, as fear-provoking as blood. Its force is irresistible. Death always wins, for no one can fend it off indefinitely. It claims its victims indiscriminately. Throughout history, unseen aggressive forces have been held to be responsible not only for violent deaths, but also for those who have succumbed in old age and in sleep. Dying could only be the product of a ruthless assailant, seen or unseen, who managed to overpower the unwilling victim. Moreover, the land of the dead seemed to be a place apart, governed by its own customs and laws of nature, which the living could not penetrate, but to which they were inexorably drawn by the course of time. It was a source of apprehension that the world of the dead far outnumbered the world of the living, because should its inhabitants for any reason rise in anger, then the consequences for the living would be dire indeed. These instinctive fears presuppose a world of a living dead, the concept of nothingness, that death is the total nullification of both spiritual and physical existence, has been throughout most human societies inconceivable. In the wake of death, a corpse remains, but what of the spiritual entity, the soul that once inhabited it? Where does it go? The usual explanation was that death was a passage into another world, populated by spirits rather than bodies, but which was otherwise, in the absence of knowledge of alternative forms of existence, not dissimilar to life here on earth, a kingdom in the sky. In other words, death was not death at all, but a new form of life. Dying in this world was a prerequisite and guarantee of being born in the next. Not surprisingly, man has always held a morbid preoccupation with the deceased, as the dead were in fact alive, inhabiting a spiritual netherworld. Elaborate rituals evolved to assist communication between the terrestrial and the celestial. For this purpose, blood performed an integral function, as it was indispensable for any form of life. It seemed reasonable that the living spirit world needed it also. Without sources of their own, it was up to man to provide it. Blood became the only possible bridge between two disparate universes. To facilitate its communication, and to guard against the displeasure of the departed, who might seek retribution for wrongs inflicted in life, the practice of blood sacrifices proliferated. This might take the form of mourners beating or lacerating themselves at funerals, or would involve animal or human sacrifices. Whatever form it took, the purposeful spillage of blood fulfilled two functions. It served as a libation for the spirits, providing them with the blood they craved for vitality, usefulness, and power, and it also propitiated them, removing any temptation to visit harm on the living. By offering the dead what they wanted, it was hoped to forestall the threat of them returning to take it by force. Of course, It was not only blood that the spirits were thought to covet. Earthly possessions were also in demand for use in the hereafter, instanced by the widespread practice of burying such items as food, armor, jewelry, and household utensils along with the corpse. The dead had physical needs too. Witness the custom of providing a woman for a deceased male. A lifelike female carving, excessively proportioned, would be entombed alongside the corpse to help remove the supposed inhibition imposed by the death trauma. In some, cosseting the dead by such means would nourish, appease, and distract, all to the calculated advantage of the living. Already the constituents of vampirism are apparent. The common belief that the dead can sustain life by imbibing the blood of the living is itself an expression of the vampiric process. Donations of blood through the deliberate and controlled medium of sacrifice were both prudent and necessary, whereas the prospect of losing it unwillingly and uncontrollably through perverse activity on the part of the spirit world could induce terror and hysteria. The human imagination was more than equipped to fantasize on this threat and conceive of and rationalize all manner of blood-sucking spiritual demons.